Hello, everybody, and welcome to Business Cartography. Today, we're going to be talking about how to properly map out processes. Very excited to nerd out with you all. Let's dive into it. Here's the agenda for today. We'll talk through why logistics matter. We'll talk through recognizing when systems are poor, go over workflows and ecosystems, talk about some mapping goals, and then I'll give you a brief look at our process for discovering more about processes, which is a bit of a mouthful. Logistics are everything. This is something a client said to me a long time ago, and it has stuck with me ever since. Rookies like to talk about strategy, but professionals know to talk about logistics. What good is the smartest, most intelligent strategy if you can't execute it? No good. Crap processes get in the way of effective strategies all the time. So you need to know how to recognize when your process is probably subpar. And here are some common symptoms that we run into pretty frequently. The most common of which is that teams don't communicate with each other. Just to give you a really solid example, there may be teams that work really well internally and have a great working relationship with the individuals on that team. But the moment you start to bring in other teams that they need to work with to get stuff done, everything falls apart. Other potential ones are unclear work intakes. So what are those intake scenarios? Can you map them all, et cetera, et cetera? And feeling more reactive than proactive. In other words, you do a lot of firefighting and not a lot of that proactive work. So what do we do about it? We solve these issues with maps. Today, we're going to talk about two types of maps, workflows and ecosystems, both of which are very important for charting how information and work flows through an organization. And we'll get into what each one of these look like. Starting with workflows. Sometimes workflows are very simple. They're just a set of steps that you go through from start to finish. There's an intake, there's an output. It follows a single linear path. Beautiful. It's elegant. It's easy. Awesome. Sometimes they're a bit more complicated. This one isn't actually even all that complicated for all of the steps and colors involved. There are a couple of offshoots. There are two intake scenarios that you can see here. They both lead to the same output. That's a pretty standard, simple process. Sometimes you get multiple intake scenarios. You get multiple potential outputs. That's where things can get a little messy and when you even more need a map. But even at this point, things can feel kind of complicated. So it's up to you how you want to handle this, but this is what they look like when they are built out. You can see a couple of decision gates. That's the diamonds. The cylinders are databases for where information should go, and the little ovals are terminators. This is all based on business process modeling notation. Look it up. It's like a whole visual language. Very, very helpful. Now let's talk about ecosystems. These differ from workflows in a few ways. They're not step-based, so we can't do that fancy decision gating stuff. It just outlines what teams and tools are involved and what the flow looks like between a flow of information and data looks like between them. It's more about responsibilities and who's doing what than who owns each specific step in a workflow. And it's really important to remember this when you're looking at the ecosystem. Not everybody does the ecosystem. This is by far the less common of the two that we see. However, it's extremely helpful to have a map like this. This is for a very advanced, very mature marketing organization and an enterprise company. This is the template that we would use for that. Anything in green is kind of your traditional demand gen marketing. Anything in red is production and content development. And then anything in blue is operations. This is where we start with a basic understanding, and then we could add in from here. Your structure might not look like this, but the concept is the same. In this one, the solid lines are actual outputs that would go from one team to another, and the dotted lines are data flows. You can kind of mess with this however you want, so long as you have a legend to define it. Very, very helpful for understanding how a team functions and what the inputs and outputs are. Now, you can't do this for every function a team has because you'd have way too many arrows going way too many directions. So focus it in on the process at hand. How do the teams interact within those processes and what communication and outputs need to happen? So a few goals for mapping as you're embarking on this process, looking to get started in developing a workflow. What ultimately should it do? This is pretty exciting. For me, this is another quote that was shared to me by a client, by Oliver Wendell Holmes. Essentially, what we're getting at is you can have a simple idea, but when you start to layer in the people the desired outcomes, the goals, the business objectives, all of those things, you wind up with a very complex need. If you can get to simplicity on the other side with a process that takes into account all of this complexity and still is simple on the other side, that is the dream. That's the goal. There is no way to do this other than to draw it out and map it. I mean, there probably are, but this is the best way that we've found in the work that we have done, is to create these maps and see where we can simplify, where we can optimize, where we can adjust. The other goal for this is to create process integrity. Enforceable boundaries. These are very, very important. People need to be able to hold each other accountable to the process. It's crucial. There can be no workarounds. You can't come in halfway into the workflow and get your work done because you happen to know somebody on the web team. That stuff breaks the process. It breaks the integrity. The whole thing falls apart. Even if it's just chipping away a little bit at a time, eventually you will break the process if it doesn't have the integrity to resist that kind of stuff. Also, consistent tracking and accurate enough timelines. You're never going to get them 100%, but they should be accurate enough to do proper capacity planning. This bears stating, I put it on its own slide, it is up to the integrity of the process to hold teams accountable to timelines. If you're having issues with delays, and those are consistent, and they all have a good reason for why something was delayed, you have a process problem that needs to be dealt with. Either there's not enough integrity in the process and people are working around it, or the process itself is broken. Either way, the integrity isn't there. So here's our process for process discovery. I'm going to use that word a lot today, and we're almost through. This is our bow tie. You start with interviewing leadership on high-level stuff, get a picture of what they think the process looks like. This is all mapping the current state. Then you go and talk to individual contributors to get the details. Are they matching what the leadership has told you, or are there considerable disconnects between the boots on the grounds folks and the strategic people making decisions at the top? After that, draw out that current flow with these issues indicated. Where are the disconnects? Where are gaps? Where are bottlenecks? Once you have this map of the flow, then bring it back to the individual contributors and confirm it. Did we put this issue in the right place? Is this actually where it occurs? Does it happen somewhere else? Did we miss any of the issues? Does this look like how work is currently flowing through the organization? And then finally, bring it back to leadership and talk with them about what they said initially and whether or not that held up, what you think the process should do, and where your recommendations are for how to improve it. This is how we do our initial discovery process when it comes to these sorts of projects, and this is what we encourage you to do as well to get started. Next time, we're going to talk about the specifics, what questions to ask, and how to dive a little bit deeper into business cartography. But for now, as you're getting started, building those initial workflows, showing your initial ecosystem, good luck. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to answer any questions you have on it. It's just tom@heinzmarketing.com, and happy mapping.